Welcome to Management 2110's Chapter 14 lecture based on the readings from the textbook Management, 14th edition by Robbins and Coulter. So let's get started. So first we'll cover the learning objectives for Chapter 14. We are going to define the nature and function of communication. Then we're going to describe methods and challenges of interpersonal communication. Then we're going to develop your skill at listening effectively. We're going to know how to overcome barriers to communication. Then we're going to explain how communication can flow most effectively in organizations. And then we're going to describe how the internet and social media affect managerial communication and organizations. We're going to summarize communication issues in today's organizations. And finally, we're going to discuss how to become a better communicator. So communication is the transfer and understanding of meaning. Note the emphasis on the transfer of meaning. If information or ideas have not been conveyed, communication hasn't taken place. The speaker who isn't heard or the writer whose material aren't read hasn't communicated. More importantly, however, communication involves the understanding of meaning. Now, communication encompasses both interpersonal communication, that's the communication between two or more people, and organizational communication, which is all the patterns, networks, and systems of communication within an organization. Now, both types are important to managers. So communication acts to control employee behavior in several ways. Now, as we know from Chapter 11, organizations have authority hierarchies and formal guidelines that employees are expected to follow. Informal communication also controls behavior. When a work group teases a member who's ignoring the norms by working too hard, they're informally controlling the member's behavior. Now, communication acts to motivate by clarifying to employees what is to be done, how well they're doing, and what can be done to improve performance if it's not up to par. As employees set specific goals, work towards those goals, and receive feedback on progress towards the goals, communication is required. Now, for many employees, their work group is a primary source of social interaction. The communication that takes place within the group is a fundamental mechanism by which members share frustrations and feelings of satisfaction. Communication, therefore, provides a release for emotional expression of feelings and for fulfillment of social needs. Finally, individuals and groups need information to get things done in organizations. Communication provides that information. So before communication can take place, a purpose expressed as a message to be conveyed must exist. It passes between a source, being the sender, and a receiver. The message is converted to symbolic form called encoding and passed by way of some medium, which is referred to as a channel, to the receiver, who retranslates the sender's message, which is called decoding, and the result is the transfer of meaning from one person to another. So note that the entire communication process is susceptible to noise, which is disturbances that interfere with the transmission, receipt, or feedback of a message. Typical examples of noise include illegible print, phone static, inattention by the receiver, or background sounds of machinery or coworkers. However, anything that interferes with understanding can be noise, and noise can create distortion at any point in the communication process. So Exhibit 14-1 here illustrates the elements of the communication process. So you have your message sent via medium to the receiver, where it is decoded message and then provide a feedback back to the sender. In the interim, you have your noise. When the sender's sending, they are encoding, and the receiver decodes. Managers have a wide variety of communication methods from which to choose and can use 12 questions to help them evaluate these methods. So, which communication methods should be used? Okay, for feedback, how quickly can the receiver respond to the message? Complexity capacity. Can the method effectively process complex messages? A breadth potential. How many different messages can be transmitted using this method? So these are all questions that you should be asking yourself when engaged in various communication methods. Nonverbal communication. An important part of interpersonal communication is nonverbal communication. That is, communication transmitted without words. Now, some of the most meaningful communications are neither spoken nor written. You have body language, which encompasses gestures, facial configurations, and other body movements that convey meaning. And then you have verbal intonation, which is an emphasis given to words or phrases that conveys meaning. And Exhibit 14-2 here provides a comparison of various communication methods. For high feedback potential, you have your face-to-face, telephone, or computer conference. Low feedback potential, publications. Tend to be one way. They're written. You have one reader. That's how it's being conveyed. So there's going to be little interaction, therefore little feedback. High complexity capacity. That's face-to-face. Low complexity capacity. Bulletin boards. High breadth potential. Face-to-face. Bulletin boards. Email. Low breadth potential. Postal mail. Audio videotapes. High confidentiality. Face-to-face. Voicemail. Low confidentiality. Publications. Bulletin boards. Audio-videotapes. Teleconference. And continuing on with Exhibit 14-2. Comparison of communication methods. You have your high encoding ease. That's the face-to-face telephone. The low encoding ease would be publications. High time-decoding ease. Face-to-face. Telephone. Hotlines. Voicemail. Low time decoding ease. Memos. Postal mail. Fax. Publications. We have high space constraint. Face-to-face. Group meetings. Formal presentation. Low space constraint. Memos. Postal mail. Fax. Publications. And voicemail. Then you have high cost. It's group meetings, formal presentations, video conference. Low cost, bulletin boards. And our final slide for 14-2. High personal warmth, obviously face-to-face. Low personal warmth, memos, bulletin boards. High formality, postal mail, publications. Low formality, face-to-face, telephone, voicemail. High scannability, memos, postal mail, fax, publications, bulletin boards. Low scannability, formal presentations, face-to-face, telephone, group meetings, audio, videotapes, hotlines, email, computer conference, voicemail, teleconference, video conference. So this is just a comparison of various communication methods. So let's look at barriers to effective communication. Now, it's not possible to fully read and respond to each message without facing information overload, which is when information exceeds our processing capacity. Now, today's employees frequently complain of information overload. Now, statistics show that 87% of employees use email, and that the average business email user devotes 107 minutes a day to email. It's about 25% of the workday. And yet filtering is the deliberate manipulation of information to make it appear more favorable to the receiver. Now, for example, when a person tells his or her manager what the manager wants to hear, information is being filtered. Or if information is being communicated up through organizational levels, it's condensed by senders, and that's filtering. Now, in an organization, employees come from diverse backgrounds and have different patterns of speech. Even employees who work for the same organization but in different departments often have different jargon, specialized terminology, or technical language that members of a group use to communicate among themselves. Now, many communication problems are directly attributed to misunderstanding and inaccuracies. These problems are less likely to occur if the manager gets feedback, both verbal and nonverbal feedback. A manager can ask questions about a message to determine whether it was received and understood as intended. Now, because language can be a barrier, managers should consider the audience to whom the message is directed and tailor the language to them. Now remember, effective communication is achieved when a message is both received and understood. So many of us are poor listeners. And why do I say that? It's because it's difficult and most of us would rather do the talking than listening. In fact, it is often more tiring than talking. Unlike hearing, active listening, which is listening for full meaning without making premature judgments or interpretations, demands total concentration. Some recommendations. Active listening is really tough for some of us. A lot of times when people are talking, we are already formulating our responses and they haven't finished what they were saying. And you get that inner voice, you get that noise, your thoughts actually becomes noise while you're formulating your response, and you may miss some of the message. A good rule of thumb is to always make eye contact with the speaker. And a nice practice to get into is repeating what they're saying back to them. That'll add a little bit of certainty that you don't miss anything. And that is actually considered active listening. It's one of the drills for active listening to improve active listening. So active listening behavior. Don't interrupt. Show empathy. Show interest by making eye contact. Exhibit affirmative head nods and appropriate facial expressions. Ask questions. Avoid distracting actions or gestures. Paraphrase what's been said. That's that repeating I was talking about. You want to go back and do some paraphrasing. Now, communication within an organization is described as formal or informal. Formal communication refers to communication that takes place within prescribed organizational work arrangements. For example, when a manager asks an employee to complete a task, that's formal communication. Informal communication is organizational communication not defined by the organization's structural hierarchy. When employees talk with each other in the lunchroom, as they pass in the hallways, or as they're working out at the company's wellness facility, they engage in informal communication. Employees form friendships and communicate with each other. So the informal communication system fulfills two purposes in the organization. First, it permits employees to satisfy their need for social interaction. And second, it can improve an organization's performance by creating an alternative and frequently faster and more efficient channels of communication. So when things need to get done, or you have those cross-functional projects, these informal relationships tend to facilitate better formal relationships and formal communication when there's a transition from going informal into the lunchroom to a cross-functional team. It's meeting in a in a boardroom. So one kind of facilitates the improvements to the other. Now, CEOs at companies such as Starbucks and Apple use town hall meetings to communicate with employees. Now, these town hall meetings are informal public meetings where top executives relay information, discuss issues, or bring employees together to celebrate accomplishments. These are examples of downward communication, which is communication that flows from a manager to employees. It's used to inform, direct, coordinate, and evaluate employees. So remember, downward communication is communication that flows downward from a manager to employees. And you want to remember that the town hall meeting is an informal public meeting where information can be relayed, issues can be discussed, or employees can be brought together to celebrate accomplishments. Now, upward communication is communication that flows from employees to managers. It keeps managers aware of how employees feel about their jobs, their coworkers, and the organization in general. Managers also rely on upward communication for ideas on how things can be improved. Now, some examples of upward communication include performance reports prepared by employees, suggestion boxes, employee attitude surveys, grievance procedures, manager-employee discussions, and informal group sessions in which employees have the opportunity to discuss problems with their manager or representative at the top level management. And then communication takes place among employees on the same organizational level, and that's called lateral communication. In today's dynamic environment, horizontal communications are frequently needed to save time and facilitate coordination. Cross-functional teams, for instance, rely heavily on this form of communication interaction. In diagonal communications, communication that crosses both work areas and organizational levels. A credit analyst who communicates directly with a regional marketing manager about a customer's problem, note the different department and different organizational level, and that is using diagonal communication. So just remember to recap the slide. Upward communication is communication that flows upward from employees to managers. Lateral communication, communication that takes place among any employees on the same organizational level. And then diagonal communications, communication that cuts across work areas and organizational levels. So the vertical and horizontal flows of organizational communication can be combined into a variety of patterns called communication networks. Okay. In the chain network, Communication flows according to the formal chain of command, both downward and upward. The wheel network represents communication flowing between a clearly identifiable and strong leader and others in a work group or team. The leader serves as the hub through whom all communication passes. Finally, in the all-channel network, communication flows freely among all members of a work team. And the grapevine is the informal organizational communication network. I heard it through the grapevine. The grapevine is active in almost every organization, and it is an important source of information. One survey reported that 63% of employees say they hear about important matters first through rumors or gossip on the grapevine. And Exhibit 14-4 here illustrates 3 common communication networks. Got your chain, got your wheel, and then you have your all channels. I'm going to leave this up so you can soak it in. Know that open workplaces are workplaces with few physical barriers and enclosures. There was a time not so long ago when employees rarely communicated after traditional work hours. Now, IT has made it possible to stay connected around the clock 7 days per week, and IT has radically changed the way organizational members communicate. For example, IT has significantly improved the manager's ability to monitor individual and team performance. It has allowed employees to have more complete information to make faster decisions, and it has provided employees more opportunities to collaborate and share information. In addition, IT has made it possible for people in organizations to be fully accessible at any time, regardless of where they are. Employees don't have to be at their desk with their computers running to communicate with others in the organization. Now, internet access is increasingly available through Wi-Fi and wireless access hotspots. And the number of these hotspot locations continues to grow, with more than 50 million mobile workers in the United States. Smartphones, notebook computers, computing devices such as iPad and other pocket communication devices have generated whole new ways for managers to keep in touch. And the number of mobile communication users keeps increasing. Another point I want to make is employees don't have to be at their desks to communicate with others in the organization. That's essentially what this is saying. As wireless technology continues to improve, we'll see more organizational members using it as a way to collaborate and share information, which we already have. Just about every organization does this. So, social media. Devoting a channel for information exchange about a specific topic can help compartmentalize the conversation. And it can also start a useful conversation in which employees can share their experiences and make suggestions for creating competitive advantages. So a lot of people, this is a really, really touchy subject nowadays because I know we covered social media when we spoke about ethics. There's a lot of ethical issues that correspond with use of social media in organizations. just know that it has a purpose. It can be highly effective. It's just that the organization needs to have a very strong communications plan that has a subsidiary social media plan and policy, a strong policy, and provides the employees training. Balancing the pluses and the minuses. Communication and the exchange of information among organizational members are no longer constrained by geography or time. Constantly staying connected has its downsides, though, such as impeding creativity. Collaborative work reports among widely dispersed individuals and teams, sharing of information and integration of decisions at work throughout the entire organization have the potential to increase organizational efficiency and effectiveness. However, companies need to guard against relying exclusively on IT for collaborative work. Now, for example, constantly staying connected can impede creativity. Some companies recognize the importance of downtime. For example, what is the psychological cost of an employee always being accessible? Now, will it lead to increased pressure for employees to check in even during their off hours? How important is it for employees to separate their work and personal lives? So these questions don't come with easy answers, and managers will have to face these and similar issues. So electronic media, social media, email, and instant messaging are all effective and efficient methods for communicating relatively straightforward information to one or more individuals. For instance, electronic communication is appropriate for announcing meeting times, locations, and an overview of the agenda. However, exchanging confidential information about an employee's performance or a company's competitive secrets should be left for face-to-face meetings or telephone conversations. This should also be the case for complex issues such as communicating revisions to project schedules, and the electronic form of face-to-face meetings. Video conferencing can bring geographically dispersed colleagues together to share multiple perspectives of key stakeholders. Now, for instance, making strategy for a new marketing campaign requires the participation of the client and the marketing department employees for creative input and finance department employees for the budgetary advice. So, the electronic media facilitates all that. It provides a venue to make those connections. So managers are learning the hard way sometimes that all new technology has created special communication challenges. Now, the two main ones are legal and security issues, and two, the lack of personal interaction. Today's managers need to make it easy for employees to communicate and share their knowledge so they can learn from each other ways to do their jobs more effectively and efficiently. One way organizations can do this is to build online information databases that employees can access. So what communication takes place and how it takes place can have a significant impact on a customer's satisfaction with the service and the likelihood of being a repeat customer. Managers in service organizations need to make sure that employees who interact with customers are communicating appropriately and effectively with those customers. But what happens afterward is also critically important. Managers should explain how suggestions are reviewed, and feedback about the feasibility of suggestions should be shared, not just whether the ideas are feasible, but also why suggestions are feasible or not. For feasible ideas, the next step leading towards possible implementation should be communicated. Approaching suggestion systems in this matter will go a long way towards encouraging employees to think about how they can improve the way work gets done, providing better customer service, and possibly contributing to positive financial outcomes. Managers do business in a world today where you can't afford to ignore such potentially valuable information. Exhibit 14-5 lists some suggestions for letting employees know that their opinion matters. Hold town hall meetings where information is shared and input solicited. Provide information about what's going on, the good and the bad. Invest in training so that employees see how they impact the customer experience. Analyze problems together, managers and employees. Make it easy for employees to give input by setting up different ways for them to do so, whether it's online, suggestion box, pre-printed cards, and so forth. It's particularly important today that a company's communication efforts be ethical. Ethical communication includes all relevant information. It's true in every sense and is not deceptive in any way. On the other hand, unethical communication often distorts the truth or manipulates audiences. What are some of the ways that companies can communicate unethically, you ask? It could be by omitting essential information. For instance, not telling employees that an impending merger is going to mean some of them will lose their jobs. That would be highly unethical. That's just one example. Apart from brevity, there are other elements to effective persuasion. For instance, communication expert Mark Rogers indicates that effective persuasion starts with stating the importance of following a course of action and the likely benefits. I'm going to say that again. For instance, communication expert Mark Rogers indicates that effective persuasion starts with stating the importance of following a course of action and the likely benefits. So another characteristic of persuasive messages is to use descriptive language such as metaphors, humor, and analogies. One survey revealed that 70% of employees who make presentations say the good presentation skills are important to career success. Yet, discomfort with public speaking holds some employees back. Characteristics in effective speakers include authenticity, humility, brevity, and a clear understanding of the audience. So sharpening your speaking skills. Speaking skills are skills that refer to the ability to communicate information and ideas in talking so others will understand. Abbreviations and jargon that are standard in texting among family and friends are not always appreciated in a business setting. Some additional points. First, don't be in a rush to press the send button or drop the memo in the mail. Oftentimes, poorly constructed email messages or written memos are a result of rushing. The same applies to sending communications when you are emotionally upset. Set your message aside, then review it with fresh eyes after you take a little bit of time. You might also ask a colleague to review it. Second, express information and ideas logically, and don't switch back and forth between topics. Third, check the accuracy of the content. For instance, the meeting is scheduled for 3 p.m., but 2 p.m. was written in error. And finally, read the message carefully to ensure that an inaccurate word for the context doesn't slip in. Spell check programs can find misspellings or fix them, but not the wrong word choice. Okay? So writing skills are those skills that entail communicating effectively in text as appropriate for the needs of the audience. And as we've discussed earlier, employees receive an average of 121 work emails daily, and that number is expected to rise. They also receive many written memos, reports, and policy statements. The sheer volume alone requires good reading skills. Now, what are they? Reading skills entail an understanding of written sentences and paragraphs in work-related documents. If your reading skills aren't up to par, either in comprehension or speed, don't be afraid to sign up for a reading improvement class. So in review of our first learning objective, remember that communication is the transfer and understanding of meaning. Interpersonal communication is communication between two or more people. And organizational communication includes all the patterns, networks, and systems of communication within an organization. Also remember, the functions of communication include controlling employee behavior, motivating employees, providing a release for emotional expression of feelings and fulfillment of social needs, and providing information. In review of our second learning objective, the communication process contains 7 elements. First, a sender has a message. A message is a purpose to be conveyed. Encoding converts a message into symbols. A channel is the medium a message travels along. Decoding happens when the receiver retranslates a sender's message, and then finally, feedback occurs. Managers can evaluate the various communication methods according to their feedback, complexity, capacity, breadth, potential, confidentiality, encoding ease, decoding ease, time space constraint, cost, interpersonal warmth, formality, scannability, and time of consumption. The communication methods include face-to-face, telephone, group meetings, formal presentations, memos, traditional mail, fax, employee publications, bulletin boards, other company publications, audio and videotapes, hotlines, email, computer conferencing, voicemail, teleconferences, and video conferences. Remember, the barriers to effective communication include filtering, emotions, information overload, defensiveness, language, and national culture. Also remember, managers can overcome these barriers by using feedback, simplifying language, listening actively, constraining emotions, and watching for nonverbal clues. In review of our third learning objective, formal communication is communication that takes place within prescribed organizational work arrangements. Informal communication is not defined by the organization's structural hierarchy, and communication in an organization can flow downward, upward, laterally, and diagonally. Also remember, the 3 communication networks include the chain, in which the communication flows according to the formal chain of command, the wheel, in which communication flows between a clearly identifiable and strong leader and others on the work team, and the all channel, in which communication flows freely among all members of a work team. I'll go back to that one. To finish up on our third learning objectives, managers should manage the grapevine as an important information network. The negative consequences of rumors can be minimized by communicating openly, fully, and honestly with employees. Workplace design also influences organizational communication. That design should support 4 types of employee work: focus work, collaboration, learning, and socialization. In each of these circumstances, communication must be considered. Now, in review of our 4th learning objective, technology has changed the way we live and work. It has created a 24/7 work environment, as it is possible to stay connected around the clock and work from anywhere. Social media allows managers to communicate through one channel and encourages sharing experiences. And while IT allows collaborative work, managers must be cautious that they do not overuse technology and impede creativity. Managers must also choose the right media for the message they are sending. In review of our 5th learning objective, the 2 main challenges of managing communication in an internet world are the legal and security issues and the lack of personal interaction. Organizations can manage knowledge by making it easy for employees to communicate and share their knowledge, which can help them learn from each other ways to do their jobs more effectively and efficiently. One way is through online information databases, and another way is through creating communities of practice. Communicating with customers is an important managerial issue, since what communication takes place and how it takes place can significantly affect a customer's satisfaction with the service and the likelihood of being a repeat customer. Remember, it's important for organizations to get input from their employees. Such potentially invaluable information should not be ignored. Managers should explain how suggestions are reviewed, and feedback about the feasibility of suggestions should be shared. Finally, a company's communication reports need to be ethical. Ethical communication can be encouraged through clear guidelines and through answering questions that force a communicator to think through the communication choices made and the consequences of those choices. In review of our 6th and final learning objective, you can become a better communicator through sharpening your active listening, persuasion, speaking, writing, and reading skills. So thank you for your participation in the Chapter 14 lecture. Stay tuned for the Chapter 15 lecture. Until then, check Blackboard for the week's activities and assignments.